Welcome to the Sharing the Faith podcast, where every other week we explore the beauty and power of faith in Jesus Christ, the light of the world. Now here is your host, Dr. Tom Neal.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Tom Neal, and it is a pleasure to be with you again on this new episode of Sharing the Faith. Thank you so much for joining us as always. And today, as is mostly the case with this podcast, I have the pleasure of welcoming a guest who will have a conversation with me about the intersection of faith and life. And my guest today is Chuck Marohn. Chuck, thank you so much for being with me today.
Thanks. It's a delight to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, same. So I want to introduce Chuck a little bit at length here, longer than I usually do for a reason. And I want you to listen to my introduction here to correct any mistakes I make in pronunciations or details. and then just kind of we can riff off of what I say here and continue our conversation. So Chuck Marohn is the founder and president of Strong Towns. With decades of experience as a land use planner and civil engineer, Marohn is on a mission to help cities and towns become stronger and more prosperous. He spreads Strong Towns' message through in-person presentations, the Strong Towns podcast, and his books and articles. In recognition of his efforts and impact, Planetizen, is that correct? Is that pronounced correctly?
Who knows? I mean, I
Thank you. Okay, I feel better. Okay, Planetizen named him one of the 15 most influential urbanists of all time, both in 2017 and in 2023. Chuck is coming actually to Pensacola, Florida, September 23rd to the 25th at the Sanger Theater for the Civic Leader Summit that offers 3 days packed with fresh ideas and proven best practices for helping a community inspire investment, attract talent, and generally become a place where people want to be. Today, I've invited Chuck to join me for a conversation about the intersection of faith and the work of an urbanist, especially how Strong Towns syncs with his own Catholic faith. Chuck was born in the city of Brainerd, Minnesota, which is about 2 hours northwest of Minneapolis, but he grew up mostly in a suburb of Brainerd called Baxter, Minnesota, on a family farm on Country Road 17. He and his family attended St. Francis Parish in Brainerd. That was the church where he was baptized and later married to his wife, Christy, at the corner of Juniper and 9th. They have 2 daughters. 2 small cities in Minnesota, Brainerd and Baxter, were the original inspiration for what ultimately became the Strong Towns movement in both their successes and their failures. Okay, so I mentioned all this background in detail because Chuck's whole philosophy of community and urban development, as I've learned about it, reading and listening to him, is all about attentiveness to place, to people, and to places like Gregory Park, or Rafferty's Pizza, to streets and roads that have meaning, that connect people and build communities and foster human flourishing, and foster what Pope Francis called integral ecology, that envisions the coexistence of humans in the larger environment, not as a zero-sum game of winners and losers, but as a place of common flourishing where the common good is achieved. So, that introduction, was it accurate? And maybe just your reactions to some of the things I said.
That was beautiful. And I never get introduced in that way. And that was very nice. So I'm sitting in my office right now, which is in the Franklin Arts Center in Brainerd, Minnesota. The Franklin Arts Center used to be Franklin Junior High School. And this is where I met my wife, right up the hallway here in this school. Yeah, it's been converted into an artist studio. So my journey here this morning, I left my house about 5 blocks away. I walked through Gregory Park. I walked past St. Francis Catholic Church, which is right out my window. Like I can see it. And
I did not know that.
Yeah, so place, being rooted in place, you know, I visit a lot of cities and I talk to a lot of people, and I've been very, very fortunate to get to know a lot of other people's places, but this is my home. And yeah, it's your introduction kind of captured, I think, the essence of what it means to be in a place. I mean, it's literally street names, it's names of parks, it's names of cities, it's the name of your parish. Yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm.
That is it. And so much of what I've read your kind of, I guess you could say love-hate relationship with these towns, just seeing the good and the bad and what you appreciate so much about them and where you want them to grow, is how much your imagination, your worldview, your sense of self, your sense of relationships, everything is shaped by the place that you live and especially the place you grow up. And that's why I think for you, it's so important when your work to think about making places where not only you want to be, but you want to form your children in a worldview that helps them to flourish.
I was born here at the hospital, which is a block and a half from my house. My kids were born there. My parents were born there. So there's like a lot of history there. But I did grow up on the farm that was homesteaded by my great-great-grandparents. And it's hard. I've had many, many opportunities to leave. And in fact, obviously left and went to college, came back, left and went to graduate school, came back. There was a period of time in my kind of early 20s where, because this is a small town and because it's a struggling place, the assumption of people older than me and even my peers was there must be something wrong with me. I must have had a drug problem or be in rehab or something, because like, why would I be here in my 20s? That has always bothered me and made me kind of sad about the city. Does it have enough opportunity for people? Can I envision my own kids moving back here? You and I are talking 10 days from when I dropped my youngest off in Tucson, Arizona to go to college, which was one of the most really, that mix of pride and also sadness, right? Like part of the story is ending, but part of it's, starting, and the starting part is really exciting, but the ending part is really sad. There's this part of me that wonders, will she ever come back? Will she ever be part of this place? And, I think to me, the challenge is not in wanting her to come back or in her wanting to be part of the community, because I do think that she is likewise rooted here. She has grandparents here, she has friends here, she has the church and everything else. But is the opportunity here? Is this city going to be a place that flourishes? Is this going to be a place where, and I'm going to put this in the terms that we use at Strong Towns, if she invests her time and energy in this place, will she see the place become better in her lifetime? Not become perfect, not become like the ultimate, but will her efforts and energy result in something where she can, after a lifetime, look back and say, I made things better? And I think that's a challenge that all cities face today, really, providing that opportunity for people.
It is. And obviously we live in an extremely mobile society, an economy that fosters mobility and moving and leaving places where you grow up. At least that's been my experience, certainly. So there's a lot of instability and a lot of the talent and gifts that could have remained in a place go away somewhere else because they're attracted by universities, by corporations, by whoever, to go elsewhere for more opportunities. So I think that idea of local investment is which is so important for you, kind of investing in the place and in the long term is so important.
Can I add something to that?
Build out of your philosophy? Yeah, please.
Well, I feel like, okay, so there's a relationship between a person and their place. And I don't think that mobility is bad, obviously. I think having options and choice and the idea of I'm going to leave to pursue better things, I'm going to leave to pursue something different. Even as a Catholic, the idea of, I'm going to, in 2 weeks, I'm going to be visiting Steubenville in Ohio. And then one of the things I'm most excited about is how they have created neighborhoods that really reflect their Catholic tradition. I'm excited to see that through their eyes. I think these things are all very positive. I do, though, from a secular standpoint and from a religious standpoint, think that the transactional nature of the relationship diminishes not only who we are, but how our places reflect us. I've got a lot of friends who have moved to New York City or moved to San Francisco because there's jobs there and opportunity there. And especially when they're younger,
Sure.
it's exciting because you can meet people and discover yourself and all that. And it's very, very exciting. But the relationship that they have with the local government, with the city, with each other, with businesses around them, and tends to be more transactional. Adam Smith, I think there's a lot to dig into in terms of, his teachings on, or his thoughts on morality and how it intersects with economy. And I think there's a lot of insight there. But at the end of the day, Adam Smith lived in a world where you knew the butcher, you knew the guy who made your bread, you knew the person who brought you your milk and who sewed your clothes and all that. You knew them. And so the relationship, you knew the barrister, you knew the mayor, you knew the alderman, whatever it was. The relationship there had, by the fact that you had familiarity, a certain morality attached to it, a certain, I have to look you in the eye, and my humanity would be expressed in that interaction that the two of us are going to have. When you strip that out, when you make it purely transactional, like I am paying my taxes, I expect my street maintained. I am buying something at the store, I expect it to be delivered, and that's the end of our interaction. I do think it makes it very hard it makes it harder to form a collaborative society. And that's part of, I think, that, that struggle that we have with being so mobile is that you have to work extra hard if you want to actually build something meaningful.
Yes. So you mentioned Steubenville there, of course, which is a Catholic university, and you obviously mentioned St. Francis, which has a long history in your life. And I know that one of the things you've been interested in your work is how churches, mosques, synagogues, et cetera, can help benefit the local community by making use of their resources at the service of that community and doing the very things you're talking about there, building a relational kind of culture where people are seeing themselves as participants in the project of building a city or town together and not just recipients of services that are paid for. So what looking at parishes, for example, Catholic parishes, what kinds of models do you see of Catholic parishes interacting with the civic community and so on that can be fruitful to show that what you're excited to see in Steubenville, for example, that says this is what the best of our faith can offer a community?
So let me take this in a weird direction.
Please.
I think you'll. When I was in my mid-20s, I went to Italy for the first time. I was fortunate enough to be invited to participate in a Rotary professional exchange program, and I was going to spend 6 weeks in Italy. And I had never been. I'd never been out of the country. I'd never been, obviously, to Italy. And the thing I was most excited about was to watch and experience how Catholics live in a society that has kind of a base foundation of Catholicism. How would they go about their day-to-day things, and how would that be different than the way we did here? And, not to rip on the Italians, but I remember being in Mass, like my first week there, and a woman sitting near me got a phone call. And, this was early cell phone days. And I was kind of scandalized, like, oh my gosh, she didn't shut off her phone in church. Not only did she not shut off her phone, she picked it up and started a conversation. Pronto, and started talking. And then, I'm like, okay, that was very weird. She got a second call in church and took it. And this was in St. Peter's. I mean, this was not in like your corner church. This was in like there's a cardinal giving mass and she's chatting with people. So I had this wake up to, okay, we can surround people with churches and plazas and, what planners would call like good urban design. We can infuse that with Catholic imagery and, even like points of the day where you would stop and reflect on things. And it still doesn't, that in and of itself does not infuse a society to be Catholic in a sense. Like there's something more to it than that. I feel
Yes.
like what I've seen coming out of Steubenville, the city and the community, more so than the university, although I think the university obviously influences it. What I've seen coming out of that community, because we have a local Strong Towns group there that does tremendous work, is this desire to take a desire to be known through your works, is how I would put it. So they live in a city. It is a secular city. It's not a Catholic city. There's part of the city that I think I anticipate feels more Catholic. I mean, I've seen photos and I've chatted with people and all that. But the reality is that they, as a local group, have said, all right, we need to know each other better. How do we create places where we run into each other a little bit more organically? We need to be there for the poor and the vulnerable. How do we not make that a secondary thing that we do or the extra thing that we do, but how do we make that part of our existence and the way that we actually go about our lives? When we're building a duplex or a housing unit, can we put a backyard cottage in and have that be something that might be reserved for the family that's going through a hard time, or the person who's down on their luck, or like, not really a huge burden and expense, but can we have it there so that we can offer that when it's needed? I see stories like this come out of that place, and it's not I think what's beautiful about it to me is it's not like a grand plan, like, all right, here's what we're going to do. And it's more, everyone is in a sense prompted to, as we say at Strong Towns, do what you can. And that doing what you can, very much in a, stone soup kind of way, adds up to something much bigger and much more beautiful.
Yes, it does. And it makes me think, for example, so the pastoral center I work at, which is all the offices where the bishop's team works with him here, we have property right next door to us that has been developed recently. It's being developed and will be opening in not too long a time. It's called Trinity Village, and it's tiny homes for seniors who are underhoused, trying to find stability, affordable places to live. So it's using church property to do that kind of thing and model for the rest of the city and say, this is what we do, and this is how we treat the dignity of our seniors who are homeless or underhoused and are struggling. So we're not just doing this to substitute what the city should be doing, but to model it for the rest and to show the laity in the church, this is what we should all be engaged in. So would that mean, how would that reflect Strong Towns and what your vision for, justice in building cities and towns?
So the concept is a beautiful one. We need, Pensacola needs, pretty much every city in the country needs more housing, but particularly more housing at the affordable scale. One of the things I wrote a whole book about how the way we began to finance housing at the end of World War II has changed the opportunity ladder for people. If you have a career and a stable job, you can get a 30-year mortgage and overpay for a home today. If you are bootstrapping yourself, if you are poorer, if you are trying to get started, it's really, really hard. That first few rungs on the ladder have been stripped out. And so, yes, I think modeling that this is not scary. This is not something to fear. This is not something that will change the nature of our community. That's a very good thing from a secular standpoint for everybody to be able to see and understand.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like from our standpoint as Catholics, the parish, the Greek word for parish comes from two words that mean to dwell aside. And the idea of a parish is not that it is all the members of the church. It's not that it is the church building and the rectory and whatever surrounding property is. It's literally the neighborhood around the church. And when you are engaged with the parish, you are called to dwell aside in community with the place where you are worshiping. And I think taking church property and purposing it for people in this way, to me, is like a first. I would say in my place, where we have often done the opposite, which is buy up housing and turn it into parking lots.
Sure.
To me, what you're expressing is like a first step in inviting more and more people to dwell aside the church and be a. I'm gonna say this, and I don't say this in a judgmental way, but to be more passively active in your faith life, right? Like they need someone. They need someone to help out with a funeral. I live 2 blocks away. I can make it over there. We need someone to sing at this thing. I'm there. I'm having a hard day. I'm walking by the church on the way home. I'm going to stop and do a rosary. Like all of these things become like the passive, active part of how you practice your faith when you dwell aside. And I don't think we invite Catholics to do that with as much intention as we should.
Agreed. Actually, and that's a really excellent point, Chuck, because I think what we find in this diocese, and I've lived in a number of places, is that a common problem in parishes is that transactional culture you spoke about is in the parish. People say, I come here, I give a certain amount of money, I get some basic goods from this. I get together and I get lifted up on a good message on a Sunday or whatever. We receive the sacraments. And don't see themselves as co-responsible for this community, as participants, as the very body of Christ, as those who are the living church in not only in the building, but in the world around and extending out that action. And I think that's what, what you do is really in the Catholic vision is that lay people have what the Second Vatican Council called a secular genius. The secular world is their specialization, their area. The priests are the realm of the sacred. That's their area of specialization, the laity, the secular, and then they bring those worlds together, the sacred and the secular, so that they harmonize. And that's kind of the world you're talking about there, very much. Okay, I want to jump back, if you don't mind, just jump back to the comment I made earlier about Pope Francis. So I said Pope Francis he wrote an encyclical in 2015, Laudato Si, on the environment, which was really the first teaching of the papacy on the environment in a kind of sustained, developed argument. And really, in many ways, the encyclical is not so much on the environment as it is a letter on social justice, on addressing questions, particularly of poverty and how the abuse of the environment makes the poor suffer most. And he talks in there about what he calls integral ecology and talks about cities as places where nature and human culture can come together in a non-zero sum game and lead to the flourishing of both together, but that oftentimes models that are used exploit the world, exploit creation, exploit nature, and denigrate it supposedly at the service of human beings, but really in the end to the detriment of human beings. So maybe just react to that.
It's interesting because I obviously read that entire encyclical a number of times, and it was one of these things where this obviously like rubbed up against my professional calling and the things that I do. And I appreciated it so much because I found it affirming and challenging at the same time. Right. When we think of a city, there's a Thomas Jefferson sense of the city as the necessary evil in society. I would rather live on a mountaintop away from everybody else and spread out in my own castle and avoid the nastiness of the city and the messiness of the city and the in Jefferson's age, the manure from the horses and the disease and all this. And there is a certain throughout history kind of sense that we as humans have that cities are messy and disease-ridden and crime-ridden and nasty places. And the ideal is to be out in your own estate in the countryside. When we have an opportunity in the U.S. to actually build our marketing brochure for post-war development was everybody can have their own castle, their own single-family home out in the middle of nowhere. In the 1960s and 70s, there was a backlash to this. And in a sense, we in this country started to talk about things like clean water and clean air and all that, but also how our development pattern was impacting the landscape, bifurcating habitats, slowly by like death by 1,000 cuts, harming water quality. And I think that there was a lot of interesting insight that came out of that. Today, when we fast forward 40 years, 50 years from that conversation, I actually think that the Pope's insights about how this has impacted the poor is even more real here in the US. Because what we have created is and I think if we think of maybe Detroit as like the best example of this, although to me, Detroit is just a city that's a couple decades ahead of everybody else. You have in the middle of Detroit a city that is reborn. And if you went to Detroit today, you would see young people living urban lifestyles in a place that is actually kind of cool in many ways. Football stadium, baseball stadium, nightlife, nice place, high quality buildings. If you went way out in the edge in Detroit, you would see people mimicking Thomas Jefferson, living in their castles on their own, kind of, and it might be 1 acre or 2 acres or what have you, but everybody has their own kind of place. And I've called it the donut of despair in between, because what we see from a strong town standpoint is that when we build in this manner, it tends to generate a lot of transactional velocity today. It makes us feel richer, but in the long term, it actually bankrupts our community. And so Detroit has this rolling blight that at first gets the poor and then gets the next level of poor and then the next level of poor and then the next level of poor, and kind of drags them down into neighborhoods that lack an essence of place, have too much, in a sense, communal investment for the private investment to sustain. And they don't have the energy of interaction. Everybody's too spread out to actually form a place. I use the analogy of a fire. When you want to start a fire, you have to bring sticks and wood together. If you spread it out, you could start one on fire, but they would never catch and like grow to be something more. It would always be like small little fires. We have created a development pattern and a way of building, and I think this is captured in the Pope's encyclical, that eats up land, at the same time it eats up wealth, at the same time it eats up community. And if you want to use the poor as the indicator species, you can look and see this has a massive detrimental impact on those least positioned to be able to exploit it. But I feel like that insight is like a preview of hardship that spreads to more and more people. In this country, we have a lot of conversation about the gap between rich and poor, and there's a whole political conversation going on. But the underlying reality is that Americans have never been more in debt. We've never had more struggles making ends meet day to day. We have, as the wealthiest country in the world, we have a disproportionate group of people who cannot afford, not just, could handle an emergency, but struggle to just put food on their table. These things directly descend from a development pattern that, in a sense, atomizes us financially, but also socially and culturally from each other.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
It does make a lot of sense. And by the way, I didn't realize you'd read the encyclical several times.
Yeah.
First of all, that is so stupendous to hear that. And really it's a model for how, it's the purpose, the letter was written was for people like you, not for theologians and people teaching.
I felt like it. Yeah.
So thank you for doing that. And I always appreciate Pope Francis's style, which tends to be written in a language that's very kind of, conversant with people who are not specialists. So I appreciate that. So we're moving slightly towards the end. I would like to go on for hours here, by the way.
Me too. This is fun.
Yeah. This is fascinating. But I want to, just to the point you made, I want to just share one thing. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you a question about kind of, St. Paul. I want to ask you something about that, which is relevant, I think, here. But there's a priest I'm been friends with for years, who works in prison ministry, and he's developed a reentry program, home, for men who are leaving prison to kind of get acclimated back into society and get settled, et cetera. And it's called Joseph House, and it's in Tallahassee. And one of the things he does in developing the property that they're on, they're in 2 homes, and he wants to make them into homes. And the property, he develops beautiful gardens on the property that the men who live there help to tend and grow, which really he finds leads to their own sense of healing and recovery and flourishing and owning the land that they live on, things that they always tended to feel alienated from before this experience. They felt alienated from everything around them. So, but we were having a conversation with Gerard Jacques, who who's a local, remarkable kind of politically engaged Catholic gentleman in Pensacola. We were having an exchange, and Father Dustin is his name, said this in the exchange. He said, this idea of Strong Town's approach to urban development, which Jared was sharing with Father Dustin and me before I got to know you. Father Dustin said, it aligns with my deepest sense of the injustices and social exclusion that buries so many of those in prison. Sometimes the most powerful forms of education are what a former teacher of mine called negative pedagogy. My brothers were raised amid rubble and neglect, which almost seemed to predetermine their incarceration. Those spaces of neglect and violence cry out for reimagining civic life and what I might call civic liturgies. And I just find that really powerful. So I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that statement.
It is very powerful. I think as a Catholic, I'll say this. I feel like as a Catholic, I'm called to believe that there's never a point where you can go so far that you can't come back. In other words, I understand why we incarcerate people, and I understand why that needs to happen on a human level, or on the level of our faith. I think we have to cling to the notion that there is a return path for people. And, it is maybe not our calling to decide when someone is, there's a judgment thing that I always try to reserve because it's not my purview. But I do feel like part of our calling is to actually build that path. If you think of it as someone who has done something heinous where they need to be incarcerated,
Sure.
The path being one that is full of thistles and overgrown brush and what have you, I do feel like our calling is to hack away at that path and make it a little bit more
Sure.
passable for people. And what you're doing is you're inviting people to rejoin the community, the Catholic community, but also the broader secular community. There's a guy named Sam Quinones who I've gotten to know real well, who's written about fentanyl and the drug crisis. And then there's another man named Chris Arnatti who wrote the book Dignity, who is our keynote speaker this year at our gathering.
He's the back row guy, right?
You front row, back row. Yeah.
Back row.
Yeah. Both of them have spoken about, Chris is not religious in the sense that he identifies with religious practice, but he does attend church. Sam, I don't know, but they've both spoken about religion, and they say it in a secular way, but as a proxy for community connection and people getting together and being there with each other. I don't know if you're familiar with the Exodus 90 program.
Sure. Yep.
Okay. I've done Exodus 90 4 years in a row now.
Outstanding.
Oh my gosh. It is one of the best things that I've ever done. And I mean, you're doing cold showers and you're fasting and yes. Okay. But what you are doing is you are creating bonds with other people in your parish. And the great thing about that is not only do I show up at church on Sunday and I look around and I'm like, here are for those people who don't know, E90 is a male program to help men, get prepared for Lent and go through Lent together. I could look around and I'd be like, here are the men that are in this with me. And it elevates my feeling of like belonging and responsibility. And here's what I need to do.
Yeah.
But I'll be out in the community and I'll go into the pharmacy and one of our guys is a pharmacist and I see him in there and I'm like, hey, I'm down at the store and I run into someone else. All of these little connections in a sense bring you back. They bring you closer. They bring you to the place you need to be. And you can't do that living in isolation from other people. You just can't. So when we're bringing people back from addiction or we're bringing people back from incarceration or we're bringing people back where we want them to be integrated in society, we actually have to have a society to help them along that journey. And I don't think like the penal system can create that. I think we can create that. I think we are the only ones who can create that. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It makes complete sense. I think he would see what you just said as precisely what he and others who are working with this Joseph House community are trying to accomplish, precisely that, to cut away all the brambles and thistles on the way, to open up this path and to make a sense of home, something they've never had, a place, a sense of place, a place that is meaningful and loving and all of that. So, okay, we're at the end. Unfortunately, we're at the end, but I want to end with St. Paul, because you and I talked a little bit before the show about St. Paul and what an inspiration he is. And I want to say one thing about St. Paul, and you have plenty to say, but a lot of the New Testament is interestingly made up of letters written to cities. Cities are extremely important in the New Testament. Thessalonica, Rome, Corinth, Philippi, Colossae. Book of Revelation, Jesus dictates 7 letters to 7 cities in Asia Minor. So cities become the center from which the gospel really flows. And so they're crucial to the New Testament's way of thinking. The Old Testament, everything was Jerusalem, right? The city of peace. And that's the center of God's action in the entire world. So maybe, St. Paul, how does he inspire your own work and your own, work with small towns?
So my story begins with me working as an engineer, working as a planner, and then starting to write about why I was seeing dysfunction in my place and what I thought we needed to do differently. I ultimately started to get invited to go other places and talk about this. And, I've been fortunate enough to speak in every U.S. state at this point and, other places around the world. I remember those very early days wondering if it mattered. I remember the first out of state speaking engagement I had. I drove to Bismarck, North Dakota, which is 6.5 hours away. And I was invited to speak and they said, we will have a big group of people here who are interested. And I got there and there was the 2 organizers and 1 other person. And I gave my talk and did the best job that I could and went home. I've been back to Bismarck 4 or 5 times now. And every time I go, it's a bigger group and it's a bigger group and it's a bigger group. And to the point where I actually got invited by the governor of North Dakota to tour, to go do some talks with him around the state. And I've been able to speak to now thousands of people in North Dakota. In those very early days, I remember reading the letters of Paul, and I remember reading I had a book about a book describing Paul's journey. It was a historical fiction kind of book that tried to get into his mind a little bit and like, here's what he was going through and here's what he was dealing with. And not to obviously equate myself with Paul, but to say, here's a person who had a revelation, had faith, had a certain talent to be able to communicate to people and put that to work trying to do good. And even in his lifetime, it didn't flourish the way that it flourished after him, and the way that it cascaded through time. And so I've come to just believe that regardless of what I do, what I see happen in my life, if I feel as if I'm starting something, if I can do something in a humble way, but in a way that inspires others to take action, that this will cascade beyond, what I myself am capable of doing. It's a faith born of watching Paul. So
I love that.
Yeah. And
go ahead, finish.
No, I've been very lucky where Paul wasn't. Obviously in many ways I've not been put to death by Romans or anyone.
Not yet.
But not yet. There's a few who would like to. But Strong Towns has grown in ways that I remember the days when I was super thrilled because 50 people a month read my website. And now it's, 50 people at any moment in time. You see that, I have been fortunate enough to watch things bloom more than he has been able to. So my faith has been rewarded more quickly than his was. But I still, get a lot of inspiration from the idea that if you want to defeat Rome, you don't create a big army and go attack them. What you do is you spread ideas that are really powerful. And that's, Jesus was the idea and Paul was the great spreader of that idea. I'm trying to defeat the Rome of our day, a development pattern that I think is really destructive in many ways. And I've been more effective than I ever should have been because I've just used ideas.
To end the show with something you said at the beginning, back to your daughter, who you just left off at college in Arizona, that you have a hope that she would think about the fact that if she did return and then stay in this town of, which place would it be, that she could make a difference, that it would be a better place because she came back and brought what she has, or anyone thinking that, in other words, that way of thinking about place, that's what I'm going to take away from this conversation today, by the way. Very powerful and desperately needed in our culture. So thank you so much, Chuck, for this time. It's been really enlightening and fun to talk to you.
Thank you. I was a little nervous that I would be inadequate in having this conversation, but you've helped me reach things that I ponder, but I don't often speak. And so thank you for this. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I really, really enjoy it. I hope to get to meet you when you're in town in a little under a month.
Likewise.
How would people get a hold of your blog, et cetera, so people could look you up?
It is impossible to not find us if you just type Strong Towns into anything.
That's true, I found that.
So, yeah, strongtowns.org is our website. But if you are into books or, Twitter or YouTube or like whatever your path of nourishment is or degeneracy is, if it's Twitter, you will find us there sharing this message with people. And please pass it on. We would love to include whoever's listening in our conversation.
Excellent. And next time you go to Rafferty's, have a piece of pizza for me.
Today's Wednesday, which is my writing day. And so I intend to be at Rafferty's.
I can't even believe that's absurd.
If you come to town, we'll go to Rafferty's. Come to town someday and I'll take you,
Okay.
I'll take you out to dinner. It will be
that
really
sounds
fun.
like a great deal. I'm going to tell the bishop that he's going to fly me up there as a professional development. That sounds like a A great
I'm all
idea.
in.
Jared and I will go together. We'll have a blast. Well, God bless you and your family and your work, and may God prosper the work of your hands, Chuck.
Thank you, my friend. Take care.
Okay. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for another edition of Sharing the Faith. This is a production of the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thanks again to Derek Diamond, our producer. And please join us again in another 2 weeks for this continuing conversation on faith and life. God bless you.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Sharing the Faith podcast. If you would like to learn more about the podcast, visit ptdiocese.org/sharingthefaith. If you listen to the audio version through an app such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe or leave a comment on the episode. Thank you for listening.